movies or in designs, and then like Figma is all great, but all of that is not web artifacts. And another problem is like developers tends to be hands-on on the project way too late in the game. And the problem with that, and we'll show it later, is like it tends to be a disconnection between what the needs of the following teams, so the developers are, and what the scope is supposed to be. So sometimes you have that dreaded design to developer handover, and it's actually where we spot usually a lot of scope creep. So that atypical idea, maybe not that atypical, was to evaluate on our side, like, can we use some really like an AI-driven UI design process? So the main question is probably how. Just how, right? Or maybe you also wonder why, probably. I'll mention that. Also, maybe you're also wondering who the hell's that guy? Sorry, did I introduce myself? So, my name's Simon, nice to meet you all. I'm super glad everyone's showing up at that event and you're like, the room's packed. I'm sorry, people have to sit on the floor. I'm really sorry. I'm working with Evolving Web. There's a few of us here, so like feel free to come and speak at the booth later, if you want to pursue the conversation. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me by going by Goffy on the Drupal community. As I said, I'm working for Evolving Web. So Evolving Web is a Montreal-based but global web agency, digital agency, if you will. We're focused on Drupal, obviously. We do a little bit of other CMSs too. We're one of the top 10 Drupal contributors in the Drupal space. We're a Diamond certified Drupal partner. We've been part of the first version of the Drupal CMS leadership team. We've been involved, if you've used Drupal CMS, all the analytics integration, like the out-of-the-box Google Analytics integration was done by people from my team. We're doing also a lot of trainings since more than 15 years. It's been really big part of our company. On top of developing website, we do design, we do strategy, like everything you can expect from a full service agency. And we're also the organizer of the Evolve Digital event series, and next one is in Canada, in Montreal, in June. So we're very happy to see you all there. So let's start with why I'm bringing that topic. I'm actually going to do that in reverse order: who, why, and then how. So current pain points. We kind of shed light quickly on that in the introduction, but the first thing is like what we realize more and more is like designer time is scarce. Like good designers, their time is really scarce. But obviously with AI, developer time tends to be more and more commoditized. So from that, another aspect, like I told you in the introduction, is like when we follow the typical project flow, usually we have kind of an unconstrained discovery and design phase, which most of the time leads to overages because there's no scope control and budget control that happens to be connected with the actual artifact that we need to build, whether it's based on Drupal or any technical system. And if we picture like an actual situation where we use Figma files, where when we do that handover from the designers to the developer, there tends to be some friction. Sometimes, or often, depending on your situation, you'll answer one of the other. You can note the answer in your notebook, and we'll come back to it later. And there's also a market reality these days, which is you can consider that a pain point if you're in the agency world or not. But if you think about it, whether should we use AI or not, like the reality is like if as agencies or Drupal service providers or digital service providers we're still having clients, it's just because they still didn't figure out how to replace us completely and use AI, because it's not there yet, and it might never be. So if the reason they're coming to us is that like we are the experts and we can still provide value, and they clearly expect us to use those technologies. Because why wouldn't we? I mean, it would be silly to not leverage those and bring more value to the work we're giving them. So we saw an opportunity, let's say a month ago. And by the way, just as a caveat emptor, I was not supposed to be here today. So I'm clearly like just a last minute replacement because my colleague that was supposed to present on a totally different topic wasn't able to make it because I sent him to a client contract for the whole week. So, but I mean, that was not a stratagem. It was just that it had to happen, and I was not going to just impersonate him and do a bad job at delivering his talk. So I just said, well, what could be interesting? Well, I'm just going to bring you guys kind of a report of what's happening in the trenches at Evolving Web for the last 3-4 weeks, where we had that opportunity, and I thought, like, I'm going to just explain what we're doing, and we're going to have a nice discussion about it. So we had a few lines. The project was like, it seems like they're becoming more and more common, but tight deadline, tight budgets, and like, you know, everyone needs to work, so we're gonna need to build those projects. But because of our standard kind of lengthy process, it's kind of unsuitable for those small projects. And like as I said, we're always facing some overages risks if we're not careful about scope control. So ask ourselves, can we pivot? Can we try to leverage AI because we have the developer capacity that masters those tools, and we have scarce design capacity, so they can't be on all those projects, and we can avoid that bottleneck, and also try to bring back the developers in the first phases of the project and give them more ownership and control over the process. So we posed all of those projects, small projects, and we set ourselves to do a 2-week, so it was like 3-4 weeks ago, 2 weeks experiment, time box, to see what we could do. And in order to not we stopped the product in a way like we asked them to stop doing too much work because it might be useless, but we set up a very small team of 3 developers, and we kind of say, oh, we're going to do a 2-week sprint to see what's possible and what can we bring to the rest of the team in order to try to solve that problem of being efficient and trying to deliver more work in a shorter time and under those budget constraints. So what were we expecting when we started that experiment? Obviously to iterate faster, like to benefit from the fact that as developers, I think we all accepted the fact that, like, even if we were all in denial at the beginning, like AI is never going to produce code that, you know, as good as as I can do. But well, in terms of, yeah, they can, and they can do it faster. So why not using it? I mean, we have to accept that change, right? So iterate faster. Iterate on a web-first artifact and not on a Figma file or something like a drawing or whatever. Let's try to, from the beginning, manipulate something that's web-first so that we make the transition to the actual system later on easier. We also want, as a benefit, to try to put the front-end developer be the owner of the process. And make sure that we transition the responsibility of controlling the scope of the project to them, because if we face it, it's actually easier for them because they understand more the complexity that arises when you decide to include another specific feature or specific options in your final product. But we're not looking at eliminating designers. We're trying to help them by moving up, like in the chain, moving backwards when the front-end developer enters the scene, basically. So designers would spend less time on scaffolding stuff in Figma from scratch, for example. And designers could spend more time on actually designing, like actually looking at what they see and provide guidance and work in collaboration with the front-end developer. They would guide the process with their feedback, and they would work on a real prototype, which means like they would see what we would actually get at the end of the process. So they wouldn't be drawing a nice design that might only be capable to print, frame, and hang on the wall. They would actually work with the front-end developers something that's actually doable in the end. Nice set of promises, right? So how are we going to do that? Well, we had some assumptions because, of course, we've been toying around with all those tools for a couple of months, if not years already, so there was already a few assumptions. So, in terms of assumptions, we set up the process in that way. We'd say, okay, those projects that we stopped, there were already a lot of knowledge that was collected in the initial phases. There's been discussion with the clients. We know what they want, we know their market, there was some research. I'm talking about all the knowledge, strategic work that's done in the beginning, and we're not attempting to do that. For one of them, there was already some UX research, some content architecture and information architecture already discussed and available as captured as knowledge somewhere. And that's going to be an issue at some point. Because from those informations that's been collected a little bit all over the place, we need to grab them and structure them in a way that an LLM can understand. Because you can imagine if you have stuff scattered around in your Google Drive, maybe you're using, I don't know, Octopus for the content hierarchy and that kind of thing. Everything is all over the place. You have to bring that back and kind of structure it and make it digestible by an LLM. From that, we would say, well, what we're going to try is, can we generate the typical design artifact that we usually manipulate? So let's say style guide. So style guide, I'm meaning color palette, typography, spacing, usage of the logo, like those basic aspects. Component library, the main page type mockups, and then from those initial artifacts that on the dev side we would own that process, we would bring that to our senior developers and collect feedback. But we would also include everyone else in the team, all the devs, PM, strategists, and have like an open and candid discussion about how do we feel about those AI generated as artifact as a starting point. Because the idea in the end is to make sure that at the end of the process, because we don't want to remove designers from the equation. Once that's built and iterated over and feels complete, we want the designers to feel comfortable taking that and go in front of the client and defend that as part of their actual work. So in terms of artifacts that we ended up manipulating, of course, AI, so a lot of Markdown files. It's almost like converting everything to Markdown in a way that makes sense. Starts generally by having a general brief, and like how long that should be is kind of debatable, like because there's a trade-off obviously between how much you describe your project and how much you want to pay in terms of token, because you're going to have a huge context window. But also everything I've talked about, so style guide, description, color typography, logos, description of what you have in terms of navigation, information architecture, you also want to describe it as Markdown, even if you have visual artifacts, because LLMs are going to appreciate that, going to understand that a lot more. And in terms of those HTML artifacts that I was talking about, then yeah, we generated visual style guide, content library, and mockups. Because it was a very short time box 2 weeks experiment, what we did is like we generated everything and then we demoed everything to the design team and the PM team. In retrospect, I think there might be some value into posing and getting feedback at each step. So let's say we have visual style guide and an idea of roughly the main components, and then get an initial feedback there, because then obviously we avoid generating a bunch of slop for nothing. So in the end, we attempted to replace the Figma data, so what you have in the Figma file, so tokens, components, pages, and manipulate the exact same of information, but in code. Quick pause here. Let's think about that for a minute with the question, does quicker necessarily means cheaper? We have to ask ourselves, because I think whether we are producing the work or whether we are buying the work, our usual currency or unit of measurement for a long time has always been time. And we're gonna get an issue, we're gonna have an issue with that whether we're offering the service or buying the service at some point. From what we've seen, and it's very early, so those numbers, they don't mean anything, but from what we thought we would have spent in design time compared to what we actually spend to get something that the designers actually feel confident to go and present to the client, we save approximately 70% of the time. So obviously, it's just like it had to be confirmed on all the projects. Also, in terms of quicker, because we were manipulating a design artifact that the developer can reprompt and manipulate pretty easily, we could have like very tight loops in terms of having, instead of having maybe several days of a week of a designer thinking about things and then seeking for feedback and then iterating again, that initial scaffolding phase was much quicker. But getting back to the question, because it's quicker, should it be cheaper? Do we think the work has less value because it's delivered more quickly?
No.
All right. Thank you. I think everyone may be kind of afraid to express their opinion. I'm not going to give a definite answer, but I'm going to phrase it like this, because I've overheard that yesterday. Maybe Maya, you remember what was said, but when you go to any online shop and you select a quicker delivery option, are you paying less money? No, you're paying more money because you get actually added value. So I think as a community, I'm just posing that for a minute, we need to consider how we're going to reprice our work in a way that makes sense, because like being able to deliver more and quicker doesn't mean it has to be considered cheaper. We just need to make sure that we move away from that unit of measurement that is time, because it's not like it tends to begin to be meaningless. All right, let's get back at what we were discussing. There's a kind of a flurry of tools that we started exploring that I've put it on the slide here. Really remember that what was really useful in the end to us is Notebook LM for collecting a lot of things, but that's because we're like a Google shop, so everything is on Google Drive, so it makes it easier. You can do the same, almost the same that Notebook LM is doing, with just a simple Claude Code setup, because you can snap everything in a folder and chat with it, or you can use Claude Cowork if you're afraid of the command line, but that's the one we use. And then for everything about manipulating the code, that was Claude Code. But at the very beginning, the first day and a half, we also tried to figure out if tools that provided more like vertical integration, like Reloom, Lovable, or that kind of tools could be useful, but it turns out that in the end, what they were providing at the starting point was not particularly useful, was a little bit too AI, if you will. So we ended up just saying, okay, we're going to use AI first, more like a knowledge capturing and digesting and re-expressing in Markdown, and then just Claude Code to generate HTML. From our experience, we used Claude Code, but we also used Open Code with some of the OpenAI models, like GPT 5.5. For that kind of work, there's not like it's very subjective, but doesn't feel like there's a real difference in terms of one being way better than the other. Your mileage may vary, obviously. And I guess the main reason we were going back and forth is just like creative exhaustion. Overuse. So how does it look? I'm sorry, but a lot of things we're going to see has to be redacted because those projects are still on the go, and I obviously don't have any authorization to share it. The moment it's actually live and success and we get all the authorization, we will share, and I'm happy to redo a talk with the actual examples. But right now we're going to have to fake it a little bit. So as I said, it's nice. You collect all your knowledge, you put everything in that case, Notebook LM. It gives you a summary, and you know you need to extract something that's going to be useful for a tool like Claude Code. What do you type in the prompt of Notebook LM? It's like being a writer staring at a blank page and where do I start? Well, you ask ChatGPT, right? I mean, you might find that funny, but I really encourage you to do that. If you're staring like, where do I start? Just ask an LLM, ask another LLM. In that case, the prompt that we got, and it's truncated. It's not actually just bring me the project brief. It's actually way more structured than that, and that's like, you probably all know that. But in case you don't know, elaborate prompts, like elaborating really not complex, but precise prompt really matters. So it's just a screenshot, but the actual file is more than 100 lines long. So it's just like, it's a beefy prompt. So that was the knowledge collection. And then we move into like using that knowledge that was restructured, if you will, to start producing design assets. But really, it's just another code base from a development perspective, just transitioning from maybe a Figma project to a code base on the computer. So it's a bunch of folders and files. You can use Git, which is nice. It's nicer than the Figma file history, I guess, in my opinion. You do a little bit of organization, and I mean, like it's very opinionated, but you have your input assets, the spec you generate, the design you generate, stuff like that. And then what's really important, in our opinion, is like don't just ask the LLM of choice to do the work, but also ask it to maintain a log of what you're doing. At the end of each conversation, ask it to export the whole conversation and store it somewhere. And with that context, ask it to maintain more than just the artifact that you want to produce for your client, but also a page that allows you to navigate between those components, a page that shows you the history of everything you've been doing. It seems tedious, but when you're going to show that to the designers, they're going to have questions, and you're gonna the first time you're going to do that, if you're not taking care of that, you're going to wonder what was actually the path that you follow, all that meandering around the trial and error attempts. And it's really great to have that actual history inside deliverables just to explain your work. And also, the reality is like, anyone that pretends to be an AI expert these days is obviously a liar. I mean, or a good marketer. But we like, yeah.
Oh, you said we could interrupt with questions.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm just curious, so you're doing that, but is it like a manual process? You extract the log, you copy it in Google Drive, I guess, or?
So, yeah, two possible answers to that. The first one is obviously yes. The first time, like it's a little bit manual, so it's like you prompting, having conversation, and also stop there is like, when you start using those tools, you need to kind of have a way to kind of render your work a little bit discrete and chunk it. We have a tendency to work in flow. And I mean, you all had, I think, experiences with like long ChatGPT conversation when it starts to forget the beginning. That's exactly that. If you add to that the fact that the context windows are getting larger and larger, that feeling of the AI losing the plot tends to disappear at the expense of paying way more to maintain all that knowledge every time you reprompt it. So try to get an idea of what you want to do in discrete pieces, and every time it's complete, just stop, collect what happened, commit to Git, and start a new conversation. And the real challenge is to figure out a way to maintain what really matters between those conversations. Just starting afresh really matters. So to answer your question, there's two aspects, two things you can do is like, you do it manually the first time, and then after a couple of times, you just ask the LLM to help you write a skill or a couple of skills that encapsulate the fact that you always want to do those steps at the beginning or at the end. There's also a couple of tools, like after the talk I can show you, but if you're using Claude Code, I don't know, any of you know Claude Mem? So it's a plugin you attach to Claude Code. This can monitor all the interactions in your projects, and every time there's like this conversation start, conversation end, or let's say context repackaging or compressing, it's going to try to summarize everything that happened and maintain that in a memory, so that automatically when you start a new conversation for that specific project, it's going to repopulate the context with what it learned for you, basically. And as a nice addition, it's like an automatic logger of what you're doing that you can also look back as like, oh, it was 2 weeks ago, and you can go back to the conversation. That's kind of nice. And to close that aside, it's a reminder to don't put any password, any API key in your conversations, because and they're live everywhere. Okay, so it's a code base, so in the end it produces like a nice, let's say, static website, static set of HTML artifacts, so you can just deploy it somewhere. I mean, GitHub Pages, GitLab Pages, Netlify, you name it, everything is like free or mostly free these days, and it's a nice way to just put it out there and share it with the rest of the team. And it looks like this. And it could look very different in your case, but what you see here is like obviously a couple of .agents, .Claude that captures what we've been building in terms of skills, the Claude.md, entry point for Claude. Here you can see about interesting folders like assets, where we put everything we grab from the outside, logo, let's say inspirational imagery that you want the LLM to consider, because they're also getting good at that, considering what's inside an image. Other important folder is the specs folder. That's the way we organize it. It's like where we put the markdown that we generate. Every time we do something, there's like the markdown description of what we generated, and the results folder, which holds like all the HTML artifacts. And what you see on the right is like what the actual main entry point of that project looks like. So the way that specific colleague that worked on my team for that decided to do is like every time he was producing a new iteration of his work, he would just add a line on top with links to the artifact and a quick description of what was different. And when you think about it, it's actually, for any stakeholder of your project, it's actually way more approachable than trying to understand the history of a Figma file and trying to figure out, once you find the right history log, what page you should be looking at, what folder, and so on and so forth. So I'm circling back to that. But I told you, like, in the specs, that's where we generate all the markdown files that describe the project. And what we do in order, like I was referring to the fact that it's good to reset the conversation with the agent frequently enough to avoid having a long context window that tends to be counterproductive. What's interesting is to refer in your main Claude.md what are the files from your specs that matters all the time, so that every time you start something, is like those things you need to really have that in mind. Funny how we anthropomorphized the AI. You need to have that in mind every time you start a new conversation. So that's I'm calling that the information preparation, which is like from the brief and a few material, logo, inspirational imagery, we're creating those markdown files. And then from that, we're gonna create those actual page mockups. So we prompt the LLM to create pages. It's gonna use the project brief. It's gonna respect the style guide. You can also instruct if you have a specific coding style you want to follow. Like I have a developer that's huge on BEM. He wants everything to be BEM, it just says, and in the artifact, everything follows the BEM CSS and markup convention. And also expressing that you want to follow a component approach. You don't want all your page mockups to be one of a kind. Like, I don't know, everyone battled with the designers not doing components in their Figma files. I mean, it's the same thing. You want everything to be kind of componentized. And that's the example of the prompt we give to generate all those pages. It basically says, I want to generate all those pages. Some redaction, I'm sorry. Set of instructions. And here we have a paragraph for Claude Code that instruct Claude Code, but because we were trying different tools, we had like a specific section for different tools. All right, what do you have next? A demo. Cool. How are we turning the clock on? Pretty fast. I can't show anything from client work, so I needed to have like a fake example, fake project. So like, what could I pick as something that needs a website? It's going to need a website soon. You all know we are going to have like our own DrupalCon here in Canada. Yeah, or DrupalCon because we can. Okay. Anyway, there's already a website, which is basically that. That's the website. All right. So, well, like, using that process that I just demonstrated, can we actually, generate something that looks a little bit, maybe a little bit better? Let's try to figure out a way to show you that. What you're going to do, I'm going to go to mirror real quick. Can you see that appearing? Yeah, great. So as I said, it's like at the end of the process, you're generating basically a static website. So, and in my work log, I have all the things I like all the interactions with the LLMs. So, for example, no. So, for example, like at the very beginning, obviously I was like, let's start with generating the style guide. And the thing is, like, because I started that from scratch and I didn't have any 3-hour like research work for a strategist or a UX designer, it had to ask me questions. So it was just like asking me, do you want that direction, that direction? And I was like, well, I'm going to consider you the expert, so I took the default options all the time just to move on. So from that first steps, we got some foundation, style guide. You see that we get the tokens that are generated, and then after that, there's a couple of iterations to generate the page from those specs. So I mean that one is a pretty duct tapey attempt, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But here's the way, for example, that I ask him to respect how I want to maintain that workload. So it just sits at the bottom of the file, and then automatically it says like, oh, there's a template. I'm just going to reuse that every time I do a conversation. So the way I do that is like actually do work, and in the end I say, update the workload and commit. The nice thing is like don't even have to remember commit commands. Like it's just do it the right way. It generates me a nice commit message that makes sense for the work and so on and so forth. So what was generated? So generated like a foundation, style guide, design system, if you will. And once again, I'm no designer, so if you want to throw me tomatoes or tell me how ugly it is, like feel free. I can take some feedback, but I guess it's not the point. I mean, if it's bad, we can redo it. The point is just to say that's something that we're going to then use to generate the next step. It also generated me like an example of how components could look like using that style guide. The feedback I got from my design team was like, that's actually not necessarily super useful to go that deep if we're following that aspect, because quickly we can have actual mockups. For some reason, the LLM thinks that should happen in Montreal. Just saying. Just saying. So that's the homepage. I mean, the thing is, we can think it's good or bad. I mean, that's not really the point, and you've all already seen demos where, like, yeah, AI can generate you websites. But the thing is, that work here, that I can take and start a conversation with my designer or anyone else in the project, took me 10 minutes. I think that's really the game changer, right? All right.
Sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
Question. Was accessibility a part of this project?
Yeah, yeah, sure. From the beginning.
And did you notice any accessibility issues? It just seems to me that it's created a bright red and with white text.
Because on my attempt here, just because I wanted to show something, there was no constraint about that. But for the project that we used, we had specific skills. It was like every time an artifact is generated, you have to follow these rules. You have to make sure it actually respects the accessibility guidelines, etc., etc. Like even though we had that as a guidelines, there were still some accessibility issue. But our team is like accustomed to like spot those right away. So in the first round of design, there were like it's almost like we put that on the screen. It's like accessibility issue. Okay, well, I guess we have some more work to do. And to that extent, there was not another question. No. Oh yeah, go ahead.
On the maintainability of this code base,
yeah.
Who's responsible? Is it your front-end designers? And then how do you validate it with the design system with designers? So where does the source of truth sit?
That's interesting. Not necessarily, I don't have necessarily a definitive answer on that. Our idea was that because we're targeting a specific project that needs to have a high velocity, what we want is to foster really quick review cycle. So it's basically, to me, it's like the return of pair programming, but it's not just two developers, it's like designer and developers sitting together. So
what about existing projects where you would want to, because this is very good for, let's say, new projects. But
so, yeah. So that's a new thing, and one of the projects we're working on is actually rebuilding a website, redesigning a website. So we can actually extract information from the website, I mean, it's a little aside, but I mean, the question is relevant. If there's an existing website, you need to ask yourself how important the existing website is versus what you're trying to build. And I had 2 developers running on the exact same example. And just by the way the instructions were put together in the initial set of prompts, one really focused on the initial work that was already done and was more straight to the point. The other was like basing all the work on the existing website and just redoing something that was completely, so that workflow can scrap web pages, look at the CSS of the current website, and use that to kind of understand the current system and integrate it. So if you want to replicate something that exists, yeah, you can just like crawl the page, integrate all of that, and then start iterating on it. By the way, at the middle point of those 2 weeks, Claude released Claude Design. So it's not part of that, but one of our designers actually tried. He took the HTML artifact that I just showed you, he put that as a starting point in Claude Design, and he started iterating on that with an easier UI, if you will, for them. And then we were able to re-extract the HTML and put it back in the project, start iterating. I'm just going to go quickly over how we collected the feedback, because obviously we're showing a website, and meeting together, having calls and taking notes, this kind of works well for the first few times, but after that you're like, we kind of miss the ability of commenting that we have on Figma. Like we click there, we leave a trail of comments that's really useful. What we did as a stopgap temporary solution, we look at the market, there's things like Marker.io that we ended up using. You use that solution, you can easily put a small widget on every pages. It opens a kind of a form, it screenshots the page, you can draw on it, you can leave some comments and send that, and it then builds a list of issues that the product manager can then grab, reorganize, and send to the front-end developer. Actually, we onboarded the front-end developer right away so that you could just see what was happening with the prototype and iterate on that. Long-term, I think we need to figure out a way to bring something that resembles what Figma provides or what other tools provide in terms of saying, like, here I commenting, and then there's like a chain of reply, and then we can close that once it's done. TBD. Once again, we spent 2 weeks on that. And I don't know if I'm clocking, I'm probably pretty late. So I have something about how we take that and we port it to Drupal Canvas super quickly. I'm just going to put that on the slide here, and then just to give you, it's basically what all those terms means, what Canva is, what Workbench is. There's a CLI you can use, and what, like, Acquia just released the Project Nebula, which can scaffold that environment for you immediately. But what you need to remember is that setup allows you to take all your static HTML you generated and turn it into Drupal Canvas code components and pre-built pages. Like those mockups becomes pages in Drupal Canvas in no time. And I tried it on my pet project here. I can show anyone after that. It failed miserably, but I'm willing to show it. But for a project that was that had actually the proper research material, it was a one-for-one match. Like I took the result of something that was built by an actual front-end dev and transferred it on Drupal, and it was like a perfect match. And then I could go in Drupal Canvas and change the content, change the page to create new pages. I'm gonna quickly go over that. That's just what you have if you're using Canvas Workbench. And I mean, you can see it. Like if you remember what I showed you previously, it's not on par at all. It's like it's completely broken. But the idea is like that environment, basically you can set a very stripped down storybook that gives you your Drupal Canvas components and a set of example pages that use those components. And it doesn't use Drupal at all. It's a standalone project on your machine, so you can iterate quickly on those components, completely independently. And when it's good enough, with the CLI, you push it to Drupal and you make it available on Drupal Canvas. So as I said, it's been 2 weeks. The most important thing, I mean, is like the way you organize the information currently in your project. So how messy it is, how organic it is going to make a difference in whether you can actually process that with AI. And like, I know I have some homework on that, because from a mess in Google Drive where some documents are obsolete, but only a few people knows about it, and all the tools that are used around that, like a galaxy of tools or around Google Drive or another system, it really comes down to one or two key people and what they have in their head to kind of understand what we should be looking at. And obviously, you can't just take all that information, put it in AI, and expect it to figure it out. So there's something about how we structure the information about a project that's really, really key. And another aspect is like, we were accustomed to work kind of, designers, they work, they give their work to dev, and dev, they work, and like in 2 to 3 days, everyone was once again working together in the same room, collaborating. The design team had an interest right away in those coding techniques. We ended up after 2 days installing Claude Code on a designer workstation, and the next day they were just live coding on the HTML thing. And obviously having the front-end developers included in the design work, like front-end developers also have that designer eye, basically. So it's I think it's very important that they can also be a part of that decision process. We're gonna skip the demo too, but I can show if anyone's interested, we can take some time during lunch or whatever. And I'm gonna thank you for coming. So. Obligatory ad. Thank you so much. And I'm here all day, so feel free to come and chat.
Thank you very much.